Good morning, Dr. Debarra. My presentation is on Hannah More. She was an influential British playwright during the 16th and 17th centuries, so 1700s to 1800s time period. She's a woman, which was, again, like a very prominent notation, I guess, during this time, because women weren't seen as capable of fulfilling jobs of men. So like writing in particular, I feel like was more more of a profession that women went into, but in this sense, like it still was it was male dominated predominantly. Anyways, I have some notes here that I would like to talk about and discuss based on Hannah More's life and the legacy that she left in her communities and with other women, especially within the evangelical community. Hannah More was a British playwright. She wrote poetry for a living, and this is the standard for how she made her means. Hannah More was a part of the Poets Society. This is where she was a playwright, an abolitionist, and a philanthropist. She was born near Bristol and was socialized in the Bluestocking Society. Within the society, she was acquainted with Edmund Burke, Samuel Johnson, Elizabeth Montagu, and Sir Isaac Reynolds. Hannah More was originally involved as a teacher in the school her sister started, but was unfortunately not supported compensation in a marriage to William Turner. This caused More to become a writer and focused the majority of her career on such. Hannah More eventually moved to London, meeting all kinds of intellectuals, like previously stated. These people were listed previously. Their contributions to society were significant as well as meaningful in the long run. Here she wrote her first poem, The Basque Blue, which entailed the celebration of friends and the culture surrounding herself. Hannah More eventually turned her life around again. In this way, she retreated from the London society. Her religious conversion completely changed her life. And religion was a huge part of Hannah More's life. And she backed all of her belief systems on these principles as an evangelical Christian. And she made a big impact in the Christian community. And one of my sources is actually from like a Christian foundation, Christian organization, and kind of discussed like how her legacy and like what she believed in and what she left on this community, how it affected them, and how today evangelical Christians are affected by her work. And so she became friends with the evangelical clergyman and hymn writer named John Newton and William Wilberforce. Her poem Slavery was published in 1788. The purpose of these proposed actions were to coincide with the first parliamentary debate on slave trade. Following this, More and her sister founded the Sunday school at Cheddar. This school was located within the Mendip area of Somerset. Out of this, More set up women's benefit clubs as well that did not last too long, unfortunately, and this was mainly due to the aims at these clubs and what they were proposing. But she made efforts to promote these clubs and establish these clubs to get women more involved in society and activism, especially what she was focusing on, obviously advocating for marginalized groups, people's groups, and this was mainly focused on women and people of color, right? So Black people that were being enslaved at this time. Hannah More was a confident and bold woman in her field of expertise. For example, she played a significant role in the conservative reaction to the French Revolution. Following this, in 1793, she published Village Politics. This was written by More to counter the claims Thomas Paine sets in the rights of man. And this is interesting because she's countering a man's claim on this as a female. And I found this like very significant and influential because she was proposing claims in her work and Village Politics that completely contradicted the claims Thomas Paine wrote. And Thomas Paine was a predominant author, writer, and activist at this time as well. But as a female, she was again proposing these claims and putting out a narrative to try to promote herself as a woman and promote advocating for marginalized people's groups. Next, she wrote thoughts on the speech of M. Dupont. This work was an attack on the anti-clericism of the French Revolution, where the system was designed to raise funds for the French émigré clergy. The next work she wrote was on the cheap repository tracts in 1795 and 1797. Her most successful work was on the Shepherd of Salisbury Plain. The Religious Tract Society continued publishing her work and supporting her movement against slavery. So these works, again, were approved by several organizations and promoted to go against this idea of slavery and enslaving people groups because of their skin color or because of their religious orientation or varying reasons for why people were enslaved. And she was advocating for abolition to free these people so that they would have equal rights in society, just like she was advocating for women to have places in the workforce and to be independent and to be able to promote their ways of life, their thoughts, their intellectualism over to be on the same playing field as men, because she believed that women weren't dumb or not as intellectual because of her sex. And so she advocated for these kinds of themes and these notions that we see predominantly in the feminist movement today. But this was more like historical feminism and not so much a modern day feminism, a little bit different, but it was still on the same idea of giving women equal rights and equal opportunities as men, and being able to provide for women or advocate for women to have means and to be able to be independent and to make a living for themselves without having to be solely attached to a man to make that living and to find their identity fully in the household, but find it in the workplace. She continued to work and fight for this cause. Moore wrote Scriptures of the Modern System of Female Education in 1799. The moral of the book was to advocate for women's rights within society during the late 16th century and early 17th centuries, This was between 1700s, 1800s. In the later years, Moore spent her time in retirement. She continued to write best-selling books of evangelical piety, and she was a keen patron of the British Foreign Bible Study. Like I said, she was an evangelical Christian, so this was a predominant way for her to spread her message and her politics and her ideas. And she continued active in the anti-slavery movement. Again, she was an abolitionist as a female, advocating for these marginalized groups, specifically the Black communities. She was ultimately a role model for the generation of evangelical women. Unfortunately, Moore died in 1833. That's when she died. Her lifespan was from 1745 to 1833. And she left a strong legacy on her counterparts, her peers, her colleagues, men and women alike, Black, white. She left a legacy on the people that she was around, the people that she encountered. She was one of the most successful writers in history as a female and one of the most influential women of the time, and still is influencing evangelical Christians, Christian organizations, and secular organizations, nonprofit organizations today, and the world. She has a huge influence on society. Moore was a British reformer, and her life consisted predominantly of advocating, again, for the marginalized in society and women alike. She lived in a world divided into two distinct classes, and her greatest reforms were geared towards the rich and fashionable, not just the poor peoples. She wanted to abolish those classes. A quote from her is, "Reformation must begin with the great, or it will never be effectual." Moore believes that there was not one distinct standard for the rich and one distinct standard for the poor. Though she saw both of these standards, right, she wanted to set this equal playing field, and this had the same expectations she held for all classes, just like with women and men, Black and white. Another quote from an evangelical Christian-oriented website: "Christians today might take a page from Moore's book. Just as Moore argued that the most powerful way to change society was to change the powerful, so too, the influence of Christianity in our culture might be strengthened most by strengthening Christians." And as herself identifying as a Christian and a woman and white in society, she developed these norms, these narratives, and promoted for the anti-slavery, being an abolitionist, being a female, and fighting for independence among women, and advocating for marginalized groups. Thank you. That's my presentation on Hannah More, and I will attach the presentation to my Turnitin submission, and I also have some presentation notes I will attach as well. Thank you, Dr. Dabara, and have a great day.